So, Andrew, let's talk about some instruments here. Let's talk specifically about keyboards, keys in a worship service.
Yeah.
How do you build a key rig? What's your go-to? Let's just talk about that for a little bit.
You know, it's interesting because keyboards have been a part of Christian worship for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pretty much since their invention. The piano, the organ, even all the other extraneous keyboard instruments have been in some way used in worship. And a lot of churches still have an acoustic piano in their building, maybe a grand piano or something on stage, which I think is cool. The important thing to think about a real piano is that it won't sound like a lot of these modern worship key sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes people really struggle with that. Why doesn't my grand piano on stage sound like these other pianos? Well, because what you're actually hearing on these albums are very manufactured and produced sounds. They're not like the original piano instrument anymore. They're much more. So I think it's important to know like what is the role of a real piano. And we're seeing this weird resurgence. I don't know if it's part of that hip culture or something of acoustic pianos, like especially smaller upright pianos being used in recordings again.
Sure.
And specifically pianos that are even a little out of tune. Like I think people kind of like the authenticity of that because keyboards got almost so produced and so like unreal.
Sure.
But it's a funny thing I'd say. So if you do have a grand piano, I'd encourage you to like take good care of it. Talk to a piano specialist. They're going to tell you how to humidify it, what temperatures to keep it at. How to get it tuned, when to get it tuned. Mm-hmm. Those are all really important things to consider if you have a real piano on stage, if you're going to use it. If you're not, you're probably going to be using some sort of digital piano, and you pretty much have two routes you can take there. You can buy a digital keyboard that has all of the sounds built into it, or you can buy a laptop computer that's going to produce all of the sounds, and then you buy what's called a MIDI controller, which is basically a keyboard, just controller for the laptop.
When you push a button, it triggers something on the computer.
And they're both good. The first thing you usually talk about when keyboards is like how big of a keyboard you need and whether you want it to be synth weighted or keyboard piano weighted. Mm-hmm. And the only real consideration there is your player. We talked about this with drum sets, like who's playing the keyboard, because they're going to care a lot more. I know at the church that you go to, they use a really basic MIDI controller that I'm pretty sure is not even weighted. Mm-hmm. But the piano player, he's just playing more changes, kind of padding.
He's doing pads.
And so that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably was not a very expensive controller, and it didn't need to be. They've got a little MacBook running main stage, and very, very simple. But if your piano player is a more traditional pianist, if they were trained in the classical, they're going to need that hammer weight action. They're used to it. If it's missing, they actually can't play as well.
Sure.
Whereas if they grew up in a church like where they were playing organs all the time, organ weighting is very similar to synth weighting, so they might be used to it. So it depends who's playing it, and it's the same thing with how big it is. I mean, if I'm playing piano parts, I like to have the full 88 keys. If I'm playing just synths and things, or if I'm traveling, I like a much smaller keyboard. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier that way. But as far as like, you know, in piano, it can be as cheap as a simple digital piano. Yamaha makes a really awesome, I don't remember what it's called, the P50 something. It's $400 or $500. It's got a basic piano sound, and that's about it. That might get you by. Or they make the P515, which I really enjoy. That's got a lot more sounds on it, a lot more functionality. I'm seeing a lot of churches use that piano now as their main digital piano because it's affordable. It's like $1,500. It's got a lot of great onboard sounds and some layering functions. The synths still sound pretty 80s. That's Yamaha. The other big name in the game is Nord. And Nords are awesome.
Well, where the Nord is, the Lord is.
But I always kind of say, like, man, just be ready. Like, if you're going to buy a Nord, again, we talk about who's playing it.
Yes.
If they're a basic volunteer, a Nord is going to be almost worthless because it is so much. There's just so many buttons. It's like a digital console. There's so many things, and you can mess it up so easy. Mm-hmm. Whereas the P515, what I love about it is you turn it on, the first piano sound that comes out of it sounds great. Mm-hmm. And then you hit the piano button again, and the second piano sound sounds great.
Sure.
You know, so think about that. Who's going to play it? If you've got a person who's going to, I said this about drum kits, a person who's going to like own that instrument and learn how to use it and program it, then a Nord could be the coolest sounding instrument on your stage.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to that. A lot of people nowadays are asking, you know, do we, you know, main stage was a big thing when it came out. Like, do we need to be running a main stage rig? It could be.
Sure.
Totally up to how much work you want to do. I mean, first of all, a MacBook's not cheap.
No.
But if you have one already around or, you know, the piano player has one, I will say that I almost never build main stage templates myself. So the template is like the organization of the instruments and stuff. There are a lot of producers who have already done this work for you.
And they're really easy to use.
They're really easy to use. You can just Google it. There's probably more of them now than I've ever even known.
Yeah.
They're going to cost you $30-$40 for a template. But the second you open it, it's going to instantly have all the sounds you would expect to hear on a big worship album that you didn't have to figure out how to program.
Yeah.
And so those are great. And what I like to do is I like to combine that with a really good piano. So I'll use, like I have a Yamaha P515 that I use as my main piano sound. And then I'll run the USB out to my laptop to provide synths and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm feeling really lazy, I'll just take the headphone output from my laptop, run it back into my P515 because it has an aux-in channel, and literally layer my synths right on top of my piano in the one keyboard.
Sure.
I still only have to send one signal to the front of house.
That's awesome. So there's lots of options is what you're saying.
So many options. And if you get out there, Google it, look into it, or talk to a company like ours, we can help build you a key rig. The most important thing is make sure it fits the person playing it.